Though a hero is a vital part to a good story, a truly great villain can help make that story. With Antagonist having such an importance in the Mass Effect series, we can only look to Mass Effect Andromeda in the hopes that we can see something great in the villain territory. Hi, this is Rima from MEOdyssey, and today I'll be sharing my thoughts on my wishlist for the Antagonist of Mass Effect Andromeda. With some small insights with the recently released Game Informer cover story, maybe we can refine what we really want from the big bad of Mass Effect Andromeda. Every good villain normally has a good henchman. Thinking of some of gaming and even fiction's best henchmen, for example, Harley Quinn, Jaws, the Minions, even some of Mass Effect's henchmen like Matriarch Benezia, they also have something in common, either a personality, a good story, or intrigue. And when you have a great villain and you have a subpar henchman, you can sometimes have that kind of imbalance. So let's take Mass Effect 3 for example. The Elusive Man is a fairly good villain. He's got a good backstory, he's got great voice acting, he's got a fairly good personality, and in a whole, he has a good storyline. But he has Kai Lang. Now, Kai Lang is a great comic book character, but he wasn't kind of fleshed out in Mass Effect 3, which made him, even though he was a very well-designed character, it made him just a bit bland, and that made the second right-hand man of the Elusive Man just fall short, compared to the fact that his right-hand man was Miranda in Mass Effect 2.
That was for Miranda, you son of a bitch.
So it's important to kind of establish that just because you are a henchman to a great villain, you have to still kind of be fairly decent. And for the fact that normally the henchman's kind of the character that we face off more often than the actual villain, it's fairly important. This kind of goes for the underlings or the grunts as well. Firstly, I guess it's important to say that their game mechanics are pretty important too. So their AI has to be fairly, I wouldn't say advanced, but reasonable enough that they actually feel like they're either learning or aren't samey. Because in a semi-open world game that Mass Effect Andromeda is going to be, and you're going to have combat encounters, the worst thing you can have is having to play the same encounter over and over again. And the AI is something that kind of helps either break or make that. Also, the henchmen themselves have to also, and I say henchmen, the underlings, the grunts, they all have to have unique designs. And if you think about enemy types in games, if you get the same enemy types, it's going to be really boring, plus you need to have characters that are designed really well. Now, from what we've seen from the Game Informer exclusives, the Kett are being designed to be almost unique, alien-like to us anyway. Very hard-looking, almost very, very creepy, mysterious-looking creatures, and the design is very ominous to a sense. So I'm looking forward to seeing that in-game, but hopefully we'll have different enemies, not just the one, and it kind of creates the idea that it's a formidable force that you're fighting. The antagonist has to be threatening, and that's probably a given. It's probably everything that we normally want from a villain, but they need to provide a legitimate threat, not just to Ryder and their team, but the entirety of the Andromeda Initiative as well, giving Ryder the motivation to kind of want to stop them. This seems really simple, but nothing really breaks immersion in a game when you have a villain that has a plan that's either really just not scary at all, way too simple, way too vague, or sometimes just silly. A great example of that is the darkness in Destiny. Now, I know there's a lot of lore on the darkness in the Grimoire cards and things like that, and I'm sure I'm not the best at speaking about Destiny lore, but when you're playing the game itself, the darkness is just the darkness. It's a very ominous term, but you never really feel like, you know, you're a threat. And that might just be the fact that the story in the game is fairly lacking, but a good enemy should make you feel like, you know what, if I don't stop them, that's the entirety of my known universe gone, my friends, my family, my world. So a great threat is probably what we really need. The greatest tool an antagonist can have is probably their brain. Think about the stories that villains have when they've outsmarted us or kind of been 10 steps ahead of us. Not only does this feel really frustrating, and perfectly so, but it kind of makes you it kind of makes you respect them more, because not only is the villain kind of besting you, but sometimes they can get in your head. And you have the motivation to kick their ass, but also kind of respect them as a character. One important point I like to make is that an antagonist or a villain is part of the story and is one of your characters in your story. So they're not just a force that you're fighting against, they're actually a character that you'll be facing and you should get to know. And as like one of the characters in the story, like Ryder, like Alec Ryder, like any of the other characters, they should have a personality and they should have a backstory that you can kind of get to know and kind of get to understand. Some of the villains we've kind of faced have had great personalities or are even likable enough for you to sympathize with them. Maybe their backstory is kind of sympathetic, maybe they have a personality that's really captivating, maybe it's just something about them. There are some truly terrifying characters that you wouldn't like as a person, but their story is really captivating. Or there are some really likable villains, so like Handsome Jack in Borderlands, he's a likable character. Joker in Batman, he's scary, but he's a very interesting character, and that's what you need to do. You can't just have evil dudes doing evil things, because you just don't have any connection to that. And having that idea that I'm an evil dude and I'm doing an evil thing is not good enough, I think, to carry a Mass Effect storyline. Because if we're going to be immersed into a game where I imagine Ryder and his team are going to be written so well, the last thing you want is a villain that you just can't really relate to. A villain that's basically just a wall. Now, I guess another example for that one would be Corypheus in Dragon Age Inquisition. Great voice actor, amazing voice, but the story for him was a bit just samey. He was a bad dude who had kind of bad ideals. He had his plans in his head, but to everyone else they seemed bad. There was no kind of motivation for us to be either kind of motivated to stop him. I guess the reason we were motivated to stop him is because he's a bad dude. But what I'm meaning is he had no personality for us to kind of even want to know him better, which made kind of interactions with him, they were threatening in a sense, but they weren't anything more than that. You want to kind of have this repertoire with your villain. You want to have almost like they're the other side of you kind of thing. And I'm not asking for him to be like this eccentric person or she to be this eccentric person, but having a villain that's actually someone you enjoy seeing on the screen when they're on is something quite important. And complexity itself is pretty vital. As I said earlier, being a bad dude doing bad things isn't really always the most compelling thing to see. His personality or the plan has to be complex. For example, maybe their evil plan isn't as evil as they seem. Maybe their motivations aren't as bad, but their means are. Maybe their story mirrors Ryder, or they have a connection to Ryder, or something like that. Characters who are damaged, complex, have this kind of good and dark side to them are always some of the most interesting characters. If you look at Mass Effect on its own, the Elusive Man, Saren, Venezia, they've all had parts of them that you could see that there was goodness in them. They had good meanings behind most of their actions, but something along the way pushed them to a different side. And some of them could be redeemed, some of them couldn't. And it made you look at the interactions with each of them very, very differently. When you talk down Saren, or when you speak to the Elusive Man, or when Liara is speaking to Venezia, you just have that feeling where, like, look, you could tell they weren't as bad as they always seemed. That maybe you could try and save them, and that's sometimes an interesting kind of idea to bring to a storyline. And maybe to add to this point of complexity, if boss battles are going to be a thing, which I know they're going to do super bosses for the planets maybe, but if there's actually going to be a proper boss battle with your main antagonist of the game, it'd be nice to actually see a complex boss battle as well, mechanically speaking. This should be basically the end test for Ryder. This should be basically Ryder's final test at the end of the game, the hardest test. So it should be difficult enough to involve some skill, but it should be complex enough for you to actually kind of be able to see that character come through it, as well as what you've learnt as well. And I don't know whether they're going to bring a boss battle back. It was not present in Mass Effect 3 at all. There were some kind of mini bosses, I guess, with the Reapers, but in a sense you never had that big boss battle that they were planning to do with the Elusive Man. So if they do bring that back, the idea that it can be maybe something a bit more grandiose, a bit more climactic for the end of the story is vital, because there's a lot of games that have boss battles that kind of just end with like a whimper, and it kind of puts that dampener on a really, really great story. So those are my thoughts on what I'd like to see for the antagonist of Mass Effect Andromeda, and I'd like to say from the hints we've seen from the trailer, from the voices that we've heard and the kind of images, the villain does seem intriguing, and the Kett themselves are kind of being made to seem as the antagonistic force, and they seem fairly intriguing as well. But I'd love to know what your thoughts on the Kett, on what you'd like to see for the antagonist of Mass Effect Andromeda are, and let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and please share this video to help the channel grow. Thank you for watching this, and I look forward to seeing you next time.